Okay, so here's what I want to say on the account of Israel. I entirely agree with Dimitri that this is probably the most god awful thing that anybody ever thought that they would um, witness in their lifetimes, and there can be no justification for it. However, uh, here's the situation. Let's keep perspective. Trump has been in office for about 7 months. Israel was created in the Middle East by the British Empire, and the groundwork for creation of Israel goes back to 1870s, if not earlier. And the whole situation there has been rigged for war, for demolition, for genocide, for a very, very long time. And part of those preparations included, in the 1890s, commissioning the writing of the Schofield Bible, and then promoting that particular version of Christianity in the United States to a very, very large segment of the American population, who are now the Christian evangelicals, who together with the Zionist Jews form a very, very large voting bloc. I think it's something like 60 to 70 million people. And if you study a little bit what their what the source is for their devotion to Israel, for their loyalty to the state of Israel, it's extremely irrational. They see this all as end times, as rupture, as biblical level stuff. And if any leader, politician, is perceived as not supportive of Israel, they might be interpreted as Antichrist. So it's politically it's such an explosive question that any politician, any leader who overtly steers away from supporting Israel, or who would even venture to have a balanced point of view between Israelis and Palestinians, is committing political suicide. And you don't have to go far to find examples of this. One of the recent one was Jeremy Corbyn in the United Kingdom, who really wasn't even remotely anti-Semitic. He just, kind of used to say, Palestinians are people also. They also have a right to defend themselves. He was trying to be balanced, that's all. And they tore him apart. They labeled him anti-Semite. They tore him apart, and they completely disenfranchised him. They eliminated him from British political life. And so, again, I'm not justifying Trump, but I'm wondering if they didn't make the decision, okay, we can't unrig this because it's been rigged for decades. But you have to take on priority issues, because if you don't, then what is happening to the Palestinians today is going to keep happening. And this has been business as usual for the British Empire, meaning using famine as a weapon of war, slaughtering massive amounts of completely innocent people, shutting people off into internment camps and concentration camps. They've been doing this for more than 200 years now. Just to give you an example, because this was, before social media, when people couldn't really follow day-to-day events and they didn't really realize what was going on. But let's say that over a 120-year period between 1757 and 1870s, at some point, 1880s, 120-year period, India was under direct British rule. In those 120 years, they experienced 31 famines. So that was one famine every 4 years, even less. Since India gained its independence, how many famines did they have? 0. And during India is an old civilization, right? So they have historical records. In 2,000 years before 1757, they had 16 major famines. So one every 110 years or so. So you see, it's, and then you have Benjamin Disraeli in the early 1800s on record saying, whoever opposes us, we will force them into submission by blockades and starvation. Irish potato famine, which wasn't a potato famine, it was an attempt to get rid of the Irish population wholesale. So let's say if you don't end this system, if you do not end this system and attack exactly the source of these horrors, then what's happening in Gaza today is going to keep happening. This is not a unique experience in the history of humanity. So again, it's not to justify it, but you really have to go against the global financier elite. And this is something that Trump has said in a number of occasions. And I was on a call in January of this year with Steve Bannon. And Steve Bannon said, Trump, this was exactly a week before Trump's inauguration. And Steve Bannon said, in 1 week starts the Day of Thunder. Trump is going to take on he didn't say global financier elite, he said them. He said the people who are in control of the most powerful empire in the history of the world. And then about a month ago, I spoke with Susan Kokinda on a podcast like this. And Susan Kokinda said that she was, she's part of Promethean Action and LaRouche organization. She's very active in the Republican Party in Michigan. And she was at a campaign event where Trump was present. It wasn't one of those big, giant campaign rallies. It was a smaller gathering of the Michigan Republican caucus. And she said that Trump, when he addressed the people, he said, please join me in the final battle against the global financier elites. Now, you could say, like, well, yeah, talk is cheap. He might have just been saying this, but why would you say this? You wouldn't really need to say this if you didn't mean it, because I think that the ordinary voter in the United States does not really correlate their grievances, their real grievances in life, to the global financier elite. You could talk about immigrants, you could talk about inflation, you could talk about so many things if you just wanted to win the election, if that was the whole thing. You wouldn't even have to formulate the thought. You would be better off talking about whatever else that actually is a popular grievance, and then go along with the financier elite, because then they would be your donors, like they were for Barack Obama and Biden and Bush before that, and Clinton before that. No, he actually declared war on them. And okay, so we don't know how that's going. But this week, something interesting happened. Trump moved to fire one of the Federal Reserve governors. And then I think the day after that, he posted on Truth Social a message directly attacking George Soros and his son, who are George Soros is not the peak of the political hierarchy. I mean, of this power hierarchy. They're probably one notch down, but Soros has pretty much been untouchable and unmentionable. I remember once watching Newt Gingrich on CNBC or ABC, I don't remember exactly what, and Newt Gingrich was trying to convey, George Soros has been funding a lot of these programs that are actually undermining our system and destabilizing the United States. And every time he mentioned the name George Soros, the anchor would just like, yeah. Let's, that's conspiracy theories. Let's not go there. Let's not talk about that. And then he finally stopped and he said, like, what, am I not allowed to mention George Soros? And she was like, well, yeah, I'd like to move on to these important questions. We don't want to entertain. So, you really could not touch there. Trump went there, and he went there with a very, very direct attack, saying that these two, George Soros and his talented son Alex, should be arrested and prosecuted. That's a very important shot across the bow. And so I tend to think that Trump is doing a number of very important things right. And of course, one of them is talking to the Russians directly, because that's by far the most important bilateral relationship in the world when it comes to the future of peace in the world, United States and Russia. And they're clearly discussing things in a far, far more broader way than we know, because, last week, Tulsi Gabbard forbid the American intelligence agencies from sharing intelligence on the discussions between Russia and the United States. That also tells you something. And so anyway, in spite of Gaza, in spite of the events in the Middle East, which seem incomprehensible and unjustifiable, I do think that Trump administration is steering the ship in the right direction. And then, even if my impressions were wrong, even if I were too optimistic, I also pay attention at the way the Russians are talking about Trump administration, the way the Chinese are talking about the Trump administration, and the way the British are talking about the Trump administration. And so the Russians and the Chinese are very supportive, whereas the British are absolutely hysterical. And, just after, on Tuesday, they had a cabinet meeting in which Trump talked about firing this DEI Federal Reserve governor, which is, really crossing the red line. You don't desecrate the inner sanctum of this banker organization that is completely unaccountable to the American people. And then everybody was going like, oh, he's undermining the foundations of our democracy. Trump is attacking the Federal Reserve. He's jeopardizing the independence of the Federal Reserve Bank. And, and so it's very clear that the British establishment and their media are very, very, very worried about what Trump is doing. So that tells me also that he's got to be doing something right.